Christopher Nolan is currently one of the most well-known and successful directors of all time. But of course, it wasn't always this way. In fact, his first movie was shot on a $6,000 budget, and they only shot 1 day a week for a year because the crew all had normal jobs. Which is a stark contrast to what he is now.
Starting with the release of the film in July, the response from people around the world
Christopher Nolan Oppenheimer
far exceeded anything that I'd imagined possible.
But how did he get here? With his first several films, he would use each of them to strategically get him closer to where he is now. As I said earlier, his first movie was shot on a $6,000 budget, and they only shot 1 day a week for a year. Everyone's gotta have their start, I guess. His first film, Following, represents what Nolan is capable of, a non-linear story with a tightly written script. But you have the same feeling watching this movie as, say, watching Oppenheimer or Dune on your phone. Yeah, you're experiencing a Nolan film, but it feels muddled because they filmed at places like friends' houses, and I mean the film's in black and white. But the audience of 1998 had no other Nolan movies to compare this one to. This blurry black and white movie of a bunch of unknowns won quite a few awards. Joel Schumacher even commented on the film when he said this about Nolan: "I always had him in the back of my mind, thinking, we're going to hear from this guy, big time. Then I saw Memento, and the promise was fulfilled."
Look, memory can change the shape of a room, it can change the color of a car.
"Very fast."
There's no question that Memento was by far the biggest leap I ever had to take. You've gone from making a movie on weekends with your friends and your own money to having name actors who you've seen in huge movies, and then spending millions of dollars of somebody else's money. It's a huge responsibility.
His next movie would have none of the restrictions that Following had. Near the end of production on Following, Nolan was working on a script for a movie with his brother. Because of Following's success, they were able to get funding for this movie. Not a ton, but it was a budget 750 times more than Following. With this film, he got to show off close to his full potential. Once again, he told the story in a non-chronological order, which to this day mind-boggles almost everyone who sees it. He got to lean into his strengths, but he was able to go all out this time. The movie was an absolute success with both critics and audiences.
How has Memento, the success of Memento, changed your life and your career?
It's meant a lot more air travel, but aside from that, it hasn't really changed anything, and I'm just trying to focus on the next film, which is start shooting in about 4 weeks.
Yes, that's Insomnia, right?
Yes.
As much as Memento was a leap from Following, Insomnia was close to as big of a leap from Memento. In Memento, Guy Pearce and Carrie-Anne Moss, they're big actors, but aside from this movie, they really only star in like one other big movie. But for Insomnia, he was able to get Al Pacino and Robin Williams. For context on how this movie was made, I literally just made a super short video on that exact topic. So for the sake of me not repeating myself, Chris at the time had just come off making 2 indie movies, and he heard that Warner Bros. Had a script for a movie. It was a remake of a Norwegian film with the same name, and they were looking for a director. Now, long story short, they ended up hiring him because of his work on Memento. Link for the video is in the description if you want more details. Aside from just having much bigger actors, this movie also had a budget 10 times larger than Memento. And this movie was made with an actual production company, which was Warner Bros. Insomnia might be his most important film career-wise, because this established that he can work with literally some of the biggest actors at that time, and that he can work under a big production studio. This movie gained Warner Bros.' trust in him, and they let him direct Batman Begins. So let's take a step back real quick. With Following, he established that he has the potential to make super interesting movies. Memento was him showing his full potential, and Insomnia was his proof to studios that he can work under their management. So how would Batman Begins further advance his career? When Christopher Nolan decided to tackle a character like Batman, naturally that's gonna draw a lot of eyes towards him, with the character this big. But he wanted to do more than that. To set some context, Batman and comic book movies were extremely different at this time. Comic books are naturally very goofy and silly, and the comic book movies at this time very much embraced that. They were never taken seriously by critics, until Batman Begins. Batman Begins' impact on comic book movies, and especially Batman, cannot be expressed enough. Following the movie's release, we saw a chain reaction of comic book movies taking themselves seriously. Some worked, others didn't, but the ones that worked really worked. And for Batman, every live-action adaptation that we've seen since has tried to copy its dark and realistic take on him. And as for Nolan, not only did this boost his popularity, but it also boosted his reputation. His next movie is interesting because it didn't do that much to further advance his career, and yet I still think that The Prestige is one of his absolute best movies. But there's honestly not that much to note here. I just didn't want to sideline it because I think it's an amazing movie. But his next two movies, however,
I know how to search your mind and find your secrets. I know the tricks.
are what got him to the state he's at now, which are The Dark Knight and Inception. The Dark Knight made $1 billion, but that is in part to this being a Batman movie, and it's just awesome. The Dark Knight was the film that made almost everyone aware of his presence, and Inception was the proof. Inception made $800 million worldwide, which is insane because it was an entirely original story. It made that money purely from its wacky concept, its great word of mouth, and Christopher Nolan. At this point, he had become a household name, which isn't that the state he's at now, where a movie can make bank from his name alone? By the way, if you want to see a more in-depth video where I talk about the production of Insomnia and Batman Begins, click right here. It's 3 minutes.